everyone. It's Julianne from the Chesapeake Center. We hope that all of you who returned to school this week are off to a good start. I know it looks a little different this year, but we are all in this together. We're thanking you for joining our Facebook Live series. And if you haven't already, please like and follow our page so you have you receive notifications for our future topics. Also, if you have any topics that we haven't covered that you'd be interested in learning more about, please feel free to message us and we'll try to develop some programs that would be helpful for you. So without further ado, we're going to get started. I'm here with two of our wonderful providers today. Please feel free to comment your questions below. We're talking all things social and emotional health for what's going on right now in these times. Last week we talked about distance learning, which is very important, but we also have a lot of other things that are going on at home, and we want to make sure that we are supporting our families in the best way that we can and preparing you for anything that is to come. So let me introduce our two presenters today. I have Dr. Michael Morse. Welcome back. This is always great to have you. Dr. Morse is a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist at our center that specializes in ADHD, anxiety, and related disorders. So we're thrilled to have you back. We also have Dr. Nancy Mahaney with us today. Dr. Mahaney is our she's a psychologist and also our director of neuropsychology at our center. So she sees individuals for therapy as well as a lot of parent coaching, and she also does comprehensive psychoeducational and neuropsychological assessments to help with learning disabilities and behavioral health issues. So she brings that lens to us today. So welcome, Dr. Mahaney.
Thank you.
So I guess let's just jump right in. We know that our clients are not the ones that have this at-home life that they're trying to balance at this time. And there's so many different things going on with parents at home, kids at home, everybody at home, just trying to get back to some sort of normalcy that we thought we might return to earlier, but it seems like we're in this kind of a little longer than we thought. So Dr. Morse, I'd love to ask you the first question. What are just some general principles for treatment and support during this time that you've been talking with your patients about, or just general information?
Absolutely. Julian, it's good to be here with you again today, and it's good to be here with you, Dr. Mahaney. I think there are three principles that I'd like to put out as we're beginning this conversation today. One of them is to think about the family as a unit. The second one is for parents to really focus on putting their oxygen on first. And then a third is I think medications can play a helpful role as part of a comprehensive treatment plan. Just to elaborate a little bit on these points, in a lot of traditional mental health work, often people are treated individually, one parent or one child. Ideally, and certainly this is the case at our center, we think about families and we think about how family dynamics are important, but they become much more important as families are quarantining together now for a half year plus. And though we have every reason to be hopeful there will be an end, it's not yet immediately in sight. And so we have to think not just about individuals, but about the family as a whole. With regard to the second point, there's so much research that parent well-being affects child well-being, and the more that parents can do to support themselves, whether individually or as a couple, the better it is for the whole family. And so something that we can elaborate on more later, but just to note that sleep is the most important health-related behavior, and that if parents aren't getting the sleep they need, it's probably impacting not only them, but everybody else. That exercise and eating well are important. And I think as we're finding ourselves in difficult situations, each of us in our own ways, that focusing on gratitude and also accepting what we can't change, these are important pieces. And so for parents to be putting their oxygen first means to be trying to do all of those as much as they can. And the last piece that I'll briefly comment on now, and then perhaps we'll have a chance to talk more later, is that medications can play a role. As this pandemic was starting and we were 1 or 2 months in, I was certainly reluctant to make any medication change as a function of the pandemic alone. I think we were all hoping that we would have been a little bit further along or maybe even out of it by now. But the reality is that if someone's been having increasing anxiety for months, or depressive symptoms that have been worsening for months, or they're starting the school year, either a child starting with Zoom schooling or a parent with ADHD having difficulty managing the thousands of emails that you've gotten from your kid's school that are internally contradictory, it's important to think about the role that medication can play as part of a comprehensive treatment plan.
Absolutely. I know that sleep is one of those things that is so important, and I think has been really affected during all of this. We've heard a lot just about different, issues with sleep. So trying to find a routine that works to get that necessary sleep, and then, like you mentioned, gratitude. I think there's a lot of things that we can do. So being thankful for what we have and what we are in control of. So thanks so much. Talking about the family unit, obviously we've changed a little bit. So Dr. Mahaney, what have you seen in terms of the family unit, and just what's going on at that level?
Well, first of all, there's so many different types, of family units. And so the way I try to look at it is to learn about the family. Hopefully there is an adult parent, and at the parent level, we know that individual has to take care of himself or herself. I'll come back to how. And then the couple relationship is also quite affected during really these chronic times of stress. We're way over a 3-month acute period. And then, of course, we have to consider children of different ages in the same family unit who also have different issues and different ways to cope with them. So going back a moment to the parent level, just as Dr. Morse was saying, it's extremely important for the parents to really take care of himself or herself. And it did strike me that, yes, sleep is just so incredibly important, but I think we also have to be so realistic that parents are doing so many different roles all the time now, whereas they had some reprieve when kids were taken care of in the school. So they had some time to have undivided attention. They could focus on their work, and then they could come home and focus on parenting duties. Now they have to do both. And because most parents really do put children first, I'm thinking many times their work, especially if they have a flexible schedule, gets pushed to the nighttime, which probably cuts in to the sleep. So they're probably getting less sleep, certainly, than they used to, and certainly less than what they need. So that's an important thing, to try to establish some type of workable schedule and shared responsibilities, if indeed the parent has a partner to divide those responsibilities with, and many don't. So again, I think we have to do the very best that we can. We have to change expectations. It's not a typical school year. We worry as parents, like, oh no, will my child get behind in his or her educational curriculum? Education is so important to us. The saving grace there is that everybody's in the same boat. We're all equally behind in terms of what we might miss. And we're just going to have to make up for it when this pandemic resolves, and it will resolve at some point. Then talking about another unit, I'm thinking of children. And again, there are different ages depending on how many children, for example, are in the family. So there's always sibling rivalry in the best of times. But when people are quarantined together for such a long time, as much as in the beginning people talked about it's so great to have meals together, we don't have to have the hectic schedule of going from one practice to another and working when you have 3 kids going 3 different ways, how to manage that. So there have been some positive things for the family, I think, certainly in the beginning. But as time has gone on, I think more and more of us are sort of craving for that normal that's familiar to us. And so for kids, I think we just have to really meet them at the level they are. And so little kids, may well need more and more time from mom and dad. They may well regress in their development, seeking more of that attention. We're going to have older kids that generally cope better, but they should not be ignored because they're missing the social interactions they so well enjoyed, with friends. And so we can get closeness, but we can also get sibling rivalry and competitiveness in a way they didn't experience as much, before.
Yeah, that was a lot. Obviously, your family was different. Different, but you covered so many of what everyone's going through. There's so many different layers to it. And I think one of the hardest things for parents right now is that they're also going through this. And so being able to, truly hide their own emotions and kind of protect their children with this. So what do you have for parents in terms of parenting and how to talk about things, and if emotions are high and your emotions are high, how you feel?
That's a great question. And I would say that I don't think we need to hide our emotions. I think we need to own our emotions and then model effective coping behavior, because our children's eyes are on us as a leader. And they feel safe when mom and dad feel safe, because then mom and dad can protect them. And so I think it's really important for when parents feel, frustrated, that they put words to that. That they say, this is so frustrating. I can't believe that this Zoom link, broke again. And I am going to take a walk, or I am going to take a few deep breaths, or I am going to time myself out. Mommy just needs a little relaxation. I'll be right back and I'll feel better about managing this. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, but also modeling is incredibly important. You asked another piece, and I think that's also important, is that I think we need to explain what's going on to children at the level of their maturation. So often, parents want to give accurate information, but I think we have to be careful with how many details that we might share. We're going to share a lot more of the science and the realities, certainly with our adolescents, and far fewer with the school-age child and a little one. And sometimes we lose track of that when we have very competent children who are bright and they seem to have so many questions. But always remember that emotionally and socially, what their chronological age is and or the level of maturation.
You had mentioned before, some realistic expectations. What are some strategies, like general strategies, that you work with families to implement? Do you have any?
Yeah, what I would say is that I think generally families run well on routine. And so we need to establish new routines. I think we need to, certainly when the kids aren't going out to school, the home becomes the schoolroom. And so I think it's very important to provide or identify areas of schooling for each child. And sometimes you have to stagger the space. Sometimes you have to stagger the time. If you have limited resources, not every child has his or her own laptop, for example, we have to schedule around that. So I think scheduling space in a way that it really indicates, no, let's not sit on your bed and your jammies to do schoolwork. Let's really make this important. We're going to get up, dress for school. We're going to keep as much of our old routine as we can, but instead of walking to the bus stop or to the car for transportation, we're going to walk to the den where in the corner the parents have set up some kind of a arrangement. So I think those are strategies that can help decompress some of the anxiety. And the more one does that in a routine, the more secure, many children feel, especially when it works. The other thing is to be adaptable when it doesn't. It's like, okay, well, we tried that, but it didn't work. So, let's try a different time of day. Let's make sure we know what the teachers expect. So a lot of it is flexibility, that really leads to better adaptation and frankly, more happiness.
and being flexible if one thing works for one child but not the other child, and
So
one might work for you and not, your children. So we're all trying to find that balance. I think another thing that I've even noticed with myself is there's no break or boundary from school or work life and home. We're managing all of these different things now at home, whereas we had some sort of break, some time to decompress from driving home from work, or just having even a cue that this is now home and I can relax. So in terms of boundaries with that, I know a lot of parents are finding that their kid is spending a lot of time like on their screens, and there can be some battles with like taking that away. What suggestions do you have about how to manage when those emotions are kind of running high? And it's understandable. They're exhausted. You're exhausted. How do you diffuse that situation?
yeah, and I think, again, it depends on what the requirements are of the school. Some of our older kids, the high schoolers, often are expected to sit, in front of the screen between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. with embedded breaks. I think some of the younger kids have a little bit more flexibility. And what I would say to the parents is that they really need to allow for breaks. Not all the work has to be done. I think, we've talked about how, wow, we're really in this for the long run. Well, if you're a marathoner, you fuel yourself along the way. And so I think it's important to build in little breaks where it's, let's just go outside and play. Let's get away from the screen. Or let's put this on hold, and why don't we approach another subject and we'll do this one later. So again, it's that flexibility that's important, so that, yes, if we're in this room, it might be the school time, but we're not in school the way you used to. So let's just take a walk right now, or let's get a snack. We have to kind of read our children's levels of frustration and exhaustion. And frankly, being in front of the screen doesn't have that, emotional receptivity that the kids really enjoy from their teacher. Like I see, several kids that they're first-time kindergartners or first-time first graders. And just as the teachers are sometimes making time for face-to-face in person at a safe distance, I think we as parents need to be aware when we have to step out of that teacher role with them and give them the nurturance they're looking for.
I just want to say a shout out to our teachers as well, because I've seen so many of our teachers who have made, the effort to do drive-bys to welcome their students, and who are really trying to nurture that in-person contact, which is so important. So, right. But I do really love that about, how parents also can, set up, opportunities for their child to kind of get away, take breaks, all of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Unfortunately, with so many stressors, and Dr. Morse, you touched on this earlier, if we're not getting enough sleep, if our general coping skills are not working, if, we're noticing symptoms in our children and it's not going away or it's not changing, what suggestions do you have for parents? When is it the right time to maybe seek that intervention?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that even if it's the right time to seek intervention, whether it's starting talk therapy, whether it's seeing a prescriber to think about medication for depression or anxiety or ADHD, the fundamentals, the foundation in terms of health-related behaviors still is the foundation. And so I think maybe merging some of the principles that we've discussed or the ideas that we put forth, there are ways that I think the family can work together as a unit, and parents' needs can come first, and it can be positive. So not for every family would a break right after work to go outside be the best way to go. But for our family, we've actually found that it is. I love my job. I have one of the best jobs in the world. I get to help people all day. And at the end of the day, after 10 hours in front of the screen, it makes sense for me to do something that doesn't relate to screens. And so in my family, we all put our devices down and we go outside. And usually we do something that involves some physical activity, getting the heart rate up, getting some natural sunlight. We'll still have at least a couple months of that before it's dark, before the workday ends. And we do it as a family, and it's something that's generally pretty positive. And then we transition to dinner time and the rest of the day with some positive juices flowing. And we did that in part because the adults in my household thought we really need to get outside after 10 hours on the screen. And so we put ourselves first, but tried to figure out a way to bring the kids along, and ultimately were successful. So I think it's important to look at those foundations, not to forget exercise, not to forget healthy eating, and certainly not to minimize sleep. Though, as Dr. Mahaney points out, it's harder than ever to get enough sleep if you're managing your kids' schedules, you have your own work, right? It's more demands than many of us have ever had. That said, when you have that foundation and you're finding yourself feeling lower and lower, not enjoying things that you used to enjoy, worry that's spiraling, being less available for your kids or your partner because you're stuck inside your own head, then it's important to think what other tools are there. And the reality is that medications can be a very helpful part of a treatment plan. The antidepressants that we generally use as first line for depression and anxiety can really help to reduce stress levels, hyperarousal, and then make folks more available to benefit from talk therapy, to benefit from the social interactions they have with family and friends, to benefit from the things they do for self-care. And so often when I'm meeting with someone and we're starting a medication, the way I see the role of the medication is to grease the wheels so that all of their capacity for resilience becomes available to them again. Maybe they're going to start new practices or find something new that they're passionate about, but often it's returning to things that have worked in the past in times of adversity. But if you get in a deep enough hole, you just need something to help get yourself out of there. I'd say similarly with ADHD, which is one of the areas that our center really focuses. If there are multiple family members with ADHD and the demands are greater on the adult than ever before, it may be a good time to think about getting an evaluation for adult ADHD and getting treated, whether someone was treated as a child or whether someone now recognizes that they have some of those symptoms that their kid who's been diagnosed also has. And so I think it's important to think about those foundations and at the same time to be aware that medication can play a helpful role.
That was great. And I'm even thinking of myself about how important it is just to get outside and do something and not be on our screens. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard to get ourselves up. Sometimes it's easier to let the kids play on the iPad while you take a breather. And that's okay too. But, making efforts to help ourselves and getting outside. And if it's not working and if we're, slipping into a slumber, we see our child, reaching out for help to do that. I also want to mention, because you talked about adult ADHD, we have so many people that come to our center who have never had a diagnosis of ADHD as a child. And especially with this transition to this online work where our structure is really just depleted, unless we can make it ourselves, that they're starting to realize that they may have undiagnosed ADHD. So just knowing that that's an option, that as an adult, you can seek treatment and help for ADHD. So thank you, Dr. Morse. Dr. Mahaney, I wanted to talk to you because I know you have this background in neuropsychological assessments, and you work with so many families, both on the learning side and the emotional side. What are the clients you're working with, what are they struggling with? What are they asking you for? Do you have any common themes that are coming up for families?
I think a lot of it is help. What can we do to stay calm? I mean, parents know that, they do want to be able to cope. But again, I think it's so important to talk about good sleep because I do think many people are not just physically tired, but getting emotionally tired as this goes on. So I do hear themes. And also parents are seeing their children now in a learning situation much more than they used to. And they too, that's one of the reasons I think some of the adults are starting to recognize when they see their children struggling to learn or to stay focused on the screen, they start thinking about, geez, I was like that when I was little. And sometimes just because they have so much more exposure to how the child is learning, they too can recognize that maybe there's something more they can do, for themselves. But I think the themes really are how do we maintain some kind of balance in our lives? And I think if parents have partners, and if not partners, a pod of people that can share some experiences so each person gets his or her time off to refuel, those are extremely important.
And knowing and kind of sensing when you might start to need that. What are some signs you can notice in your child that they might be getting kind of exhausted or emotionally exhausted?
Certainly, one of the signs is regression, where they start acting like a much younger child. Some kids will talk like a baby for attention when they're 8 or 9. Some may even begin to wet their pants again because things are so different. Temper tantrums are often a sign that the child is overloaded with stress, whether it be the learning demands, the missing friends, or frankly, as we talked about, being indoors too much. So even getting outside, if you have a balcony, if you have a porch, if you don't have bicycles to go running around, that's okay. But I do think getting out into the fresh air is extremely important for coping. And those are the signs that kids can tell you, enough, I need a break.
With high school students, is it kind of the same thing in terms of, or what would you see in terms of exhaustion for high school students?
Yeah, and that's a tough one because normally high school kids, are tired because they stay up very late into the night on their devices, most of them, or many of them. And so I think what you might see is even more sullenness at times. Needing more time alone and away from the family. I had some teenagers in treatment that talk about, my parents expect me to talk to them. What are they thinking about? I hardly ever saw them before, and now we're on top of each other, and they're really annoyed. They find parents very annoying when they ask about their day. So you'll find more irritability, I think, in teenagers. Which sometimes is that before COVID or after COVID? But often it can intensify with added stress.
And with that, I think I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, but just being able to take a break to rejuvenate. We weren't always in the house all together, so asking for space, asking for time alone, and not always having to be together, because that can.
Parents still want to see their kids, but we also want to respect the privacy and time, for the teens who want to be alone or be connected these days on devices with their friends.
One other question that we've been getting about, and Dr. Morris, this is more for you, about those who are currently on medications for ADHD or anxiety, or who are prescribed those medications. Do they need to take those medications now that they're at home?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I'll also just share one thought with regard to parental relationships. Something that I've seen a lot since the pandemic started is that as parents are more focused on academics, they're taxing a lot of the relationship capital on trying to get their kids to do certain things that may be challenging for the kids in a Zoom environment and that the teachers had to do previously. And so in terms of thinking about, again, the family as a unit and prioritization, what's important and what could go by the wayside, it's certainly not the case that children's education is unimportant, but it's often less important that it be optimized than that folks get along within the household. And that's for everybody's mental health, whether it's the parent or the child, whether it's being able to communicate around feelings that are going in the wrong direction, depression that's emerging. If there's conflict around academics, it may be that your kid's not going to come to you and talk with you about really low feelings that they're having. And this is exactly the time they need you most because you're the only human being they can access. And so I think that it's important to emphasize as we're thinking through these pieces that there is going to be some picking and choosing in terms of what's important. And that, in my view, academics, of course, is important, but it's often less important than we think it is, and the relationship really has to be central. From the medication standpoint, I would say that really connects with the point I just made. Again, ADHD medications, as we've discussed in prior conversations, are very rarely just for academics. There are a small number of people who take their ADHD medication only for learning or only for work performance. Most folks with ADHD have some challenges in learning space, some challenges in the domains of behavioral or emotional impulsivity, and those play out in relationships. And certainly there's a lot of skill building that can be done outside of the role of medications. But for many people, medications are really helpful so that they can be the most effective friends and partners and versions of themselves when it comes to their relationships. And that's more important now than ever. And it's much harder to focus on relatively boring lectures for hours at a time when you're sitting in front of a screen than it is to have a more ideal back and forth learning that can happen in a classroom. So there are kids and adults that I work with who come to me and said, well, I may not need the medicine anymore for XYZ reason. On rare occasion, that's true. Their main problem was being distracted by others in their work environment or at school, and that distraction is gone, and they're actually doing well without medicine. But what's much more common is that the roles that medicine was playing before are even more important now, not as the only lever, and not necessarily as the most important lever. Again, I think that health-related behaviors are really the foundation, but as one important lever that we do have accessible to us in this really difficult time.
Thank you for that. Dr. Mahaney, do you have any last thoughts? What last encouraging words do we have for our families that are, again, we're all in this together, but just what do you want?
Absolutely. Well, borrowing Art Clokey's Gumby figure, I think one of the important things is, to really gather gratitude and to understand that we are in times of change. And it's important to be mindful of the present, not worrying too much about the future. We need to cope with now, and we need to model effective coping behavior. Being flexible is of utmost importance. And then finally, say yes to offers of help. And if you can do that, you'll be paying great homage to Gumby.
Perfect. Thank you. Dr. Morse, any last words that you have before we wrap this up?
Yeah. I'll just say thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation. I think that everything we discussed here today is complex, and there are a lot of principles that can be applied. And I would just encourage folks to seek support, to say yes to support from family and friends, and to not wait until you feel like you're in crisis to see your primary care doctor, your specialist mental health provider. There are a lot of us out there that would like to be supportive and have the capacity to provide some different support than you may be getting from others. And I think it's important to just be aware that's okay, and I think entirely encouraged to ask for help.
It's the healthy thing to do.
Yes, it is. It's a healthy thing to do to ask for help. And it helps. It helps. If you're feeling a certain way, you don't have to feel that way. There are supports around. So I just want to thank you both so incredibly much for spending your Tuesday with me and talking about a topic that is on everyone's mind. So I really appreciate it. It was wonderful tips and tools. And for all of those who are tuning in or watching this at a later time, please, let us know if you have any questions or suggestions for future topics. And we will be doing a few more of these Facebook Lives in the future. So, definitely like and follow us to stay notified, and hang in there for those who are starting school this week and for those next week. We can get through this. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.